Batman is often hailed as one of the most complex and multidimensional characters in comic book history. He is a figure defined by his resilience, his refusal to back down in the face of overwhelming odds, and his unyielding commitment to justice. Yet, at the same time, Batman's existence raises a haunting and uncomfortable question: has Batman already lost his humanity? Is he still the man he once was, or has his relentless war on crime and his obsession with vengeance transformed him into something else, something less human? This theory hinges on the idea that Batman's actions, his detachment from society, and the choices he makes in his quest for justice have caused him to lose the very qualities that make him human. Bruce Wayne, the man behind the cowl, was once a vulnerable child, scarred by the trauma of witnessing his parents' murder. This formative event, though tragic, laid the foundation for Batman's mission, a mission to bring justice to a city corrupted by crime and darkness. But in the years that followed, Bruce Wayne's obsession with becoming Batman, with fighting crime and restoring justice, pushed him further away from the person he once was. The very mission that defined his existence has caused him to lose his connection to the world around him. From a psychological standpoint, the question of whether Batman has lost his humanity is deeply unsettling. His single-minded pursuit of justice, his moral absolutism, and his refusal to trust anyone, even those who care about him, paint a picture of a man who has abandoned the very aspects of human connection that make him empathetic, compassionate, and able to love. Batman is, after all, a human being, not a god, not a mythological figure, but a man with limitations, frailties, and emotions. But over the years, Batman has been transformed by his relentless war on crime. His relationships with others have been strained, his emotional health has deteriorated, and his sense of self has become increasingly fractured. He has isolated himself, not only physically but emotionally, pushing away anyone who could potentially help him carry the burden of his mission. His obsession with justice has turned into a rigid, cold doctrine that drives him to make morally questionable decisions and distance himself from the humanity he once embraced. The very idea that Batman, a character symbolizing hope and justice, could lose his humanity raises critical questions about the costs of heroism. Can one retain their humanity while operating outside the law? Can Batman remain connected to the core of who he is? The boy who watched his parents die in front of him while constantly battling against the very forces of darkness that threatened to overwhelm him. Has Batman's identity as the Dark Knight slowly and inevitably transformed him into a figure that is more machine than man, more symbol than person? This theory will explore how Batman's actions, choices, and mindset may have led him to lose his humanity, or at least to push it so far down that it no longer defines who he is. We will examine the emotional and psychological consequences of Batman's mission, the impact of his trauma, and the moral struggles that have shaped his character. Through this exploration, we will attempt to understand whether Batman can truly be called human, or if he has already become something darker, something far removed from the man he once was. From the moment Bruce Wayne witnessed the brutal murder of his parents, his life was irrevocably altered. The trauma from that event shaped the man he would become, and over the years it became the driving force behind his decision to take on the mantle of Batman. Bruce Wayne, once a vulnerable child, filled with love, hope, and empathy, was slowly transformed by his obsessive desire for justice into something cold and unfeeling. A shadow in the night, forever seeking vengeance for the death of his parents. The Batman was born not out of a desire to protect Gotham, but out of a need to rid the world of crime and corruption, to avenge his parents' death. In many ways, Batman is a manifestation of Bruce Wayne's trauma, a constant reminder of the loss that shaped him and the emotional devastation that he could never fully process. As Batman, Bruce Wayne took on a persona that allowed him to fight against the criminals and corrupt forces that had destroyed his world. But in doing so, he also left behind the human aspects of his identity that were once tied to his former life. The man who was once capable of loving and being loved became a symbol of fear and vengeance, driven by a single mission to ensure that no one else would experience the same kind of loss he had endured. Batman's fight against crime was never about protecting Gotham for the city's sake. It was always about protecting the innocence that was lost when he saw his parents gunned down in front of him. But the tragic consequence of this mission was that Batman's fixation on vengeance slowly eroded the very humanity that made him capable of empathy, compassion, and connection with others. Over time, Batman's obsession with his mission grew stronger, and his emotional capacity began to fade. As his war on crime intensified, so did his detachment from the world around him. He isolated himself, distancing himself from friends, allies, and even family. His relationship with Alfred, his loyal butler and surrogate father figure, became strained as Batman pushed away the very people who cared about him. His inability to trust anyone, his refusal to let others share the burden of his mission, reflected a growing emotional numbness that began to take hold of him. Batman's refusal to let anyone close, to let anyone in, served as both a defense mechanism and a sign of his deteriorating emotional health. By choosing to fight crime alone, he reinforced the walls that separated him from the world. The more he isolated himself, the more he became a symbol of fear and darkness, both for Gotham's criminals and its citizens. What's most tragic about Batman's journey is that, despite his best efforts, he has not become the hero Gotham needs. Instead, he has become the very force of destruction he sought to eliminate. His war on crime is endless, driven by his inability to let go of the pain and trauma of his past. Batman may believe he is fighting for Gotham's survival, but in reality he is perpetuating the very cycle of violence and chaos that keeps the city trapped. The criminals he battles grow stronger and more dangerous, not because they are inherently evil, but because they exist as a reaction to his very presence. Batman's obsession with controlling the criminal element has pushed Gotham's villains to become more extreme. The Joker, Two-Face, and others did not simply emerge from the depths of Gotham's corruption. They were born out of Batman's very existence. Batman's refusal to accept that some battles are not his to fight, that Gotham's problems cannot be solved by one man, has led him to create a city where the forces of chaos continue to evolve, becoming more radical and unpredictable with each passing day. Batman's moral absolutism is another key factor in his gradual loss of humanity. His refusal to kill, his belief in justice at all costs, and his obsessive need to control the fate of Gotham's criminals have all contributed to his psychological unraveling. Batman's belief that he alone can enact justice is a reflection of his trauma, his need for vengeance, and his inability to accept the limitations of his mission. His code of ethics, though noble in intention, is rigid and inflexible. Batman's refusal to kill criminals, for example, places him in constant conflict with the very criminals he seeks to stop. This moral absolutism drives Batman to take extreme measures, sometimes crossing ethical lines in the name of justice. His obsessive behavior, his relentless pursuit of justice, leads him to make decisions that are increasingly questionable. He has no true system of accountability, and his actions often put innocent lives at risk. Batman's inability to recognize the complexity of morality, that not all decisions can be black and white, has resulted in a fractured sense of justice, one that alienates him from the very people he seeks to protect. Perhaps the most poignant sign that Batman has lost his humanity is his inability to connect with others. His relationships with those closest to him, Robin, Batgirl, Alfred, have all been marred by his need to keep people at arm's length. Batman's inability to form deep, meaningful relationships has turned him into an isolated figure, cut off from the very society he is trying to save. His relationship with Robin, in particular, is fraught with tension. Batman's refusal to let Robin fully share in his mission, his insistence on fighting alone, demonstrates the extent to which Batman has become emotionally detached from the world. His need to control everything, his refusal to trust others, has kept him from forming the kinds of connections that are central to human life. He has become a figure who exists solely for his mission, pushing away anyone who might care for him or challenge his beliefs. Furthermore, Batman's constant war on crime has led to his psychological deterioration. The trauma of his childhood, the murder of his parents, has never truly been dealt with. Rather than seeking therapy, counseling, or any form of emotional healing, Batman channeled his pain into an obsession with justice. This refusal to confront his trauma head-on has slowly warped his psyche. His decision to never kill criminals, to live by a code that is both impractical and unsustainable, has left him emotionally bankrupt. Batman's relationship with the pain of his past is not one of reconciliation, but one of constant denial. He is a man defined by his inability to move on, and as a result, he has become a prisoner of his own mission. His fixation on vengeance has isolated him from the world, and as he continues to fight for Gotham's soul, he loses his own in the process. The psychological toll that Batman has endured over the years is evident in his interactions with the criminals he battles. The Joker, perhaps Batman's greatest adversary, is a reflection of the chaos that Batman refuses to acknowledge within himself. The Joker is not merely a villain to be defeated, he is a mirror to Batman's own fractured psyche. The Joker thrives on chaos because Batman thrives on order, and in that eternal battle, neither can truly win. Batman is consumed by the idea that justice must prevail at any cost, even if it means sacrificing his own humanity in the process. The Joker, on the other hand, represents a force of pure anarchy, a chaotic element that refuses to be controlled. The Joker and Batman are two sides of the same coin, locked in a cosmic struggle between order and chaos. Batman cannot escape this struggle because it is embedded in his very nature. This constant internal battle is the true cost of Batman's mission. His desire to protect Gotham and his need for vengeance have led him down a path of self-destruction. His obsession with his mission has pushed him further away from his humanity. His relationships, his ability to feel compassion and love, and his emotional well-being have all been sacrificed in the name of justice. Batman has become a symbol of hope for Gotham, but he is also a symbol of its eternal struggle. He cannot win because his war is not against criminals, it is against his own darkness. What makes Batman's loss of humanity so tragic is that it happens not in spite of his mission, but because of it. Batman's desire to bring justice to Gotham, to save it from the criminals and corruption that plague it, is noble. But in his pursuit of this goal, he has lost sight of the very things that make him human. His emotional detachment, his refusal to trust others, his obsession with control. These are all signs that Batman has crossed a line. He is no longer the man he once was. Bruce Wayne is a distant memory, a boy whose trauma has shaped him into a figure who can no longer connect with the world around him. In his fight for Gotham's soul, Batman has lost his own. Batman's war on crime has always been deeply personal. The murder of his parents instilled within him a burning need to restore justice, not just for himself but for all of Gotham. The pain of that night, witnessed through the eyes of a child, was a trauma so profound that it defined his entire existence. Bruce Wayne, the boy who once laughed with his parents in the grand halls of Wayne Manor, was consumed by grief and loss. That grief morphed into a relentless obsession to eradicate crime, to make sure that no other child would have to face what he did. In this pursuit, Bruce Wayne abandoned his normal life, his social connections, and his sense of identity. He became Batman, the Dark Knight, an entity consumed by vengeance and justice, so much so that the line between Bruce Wayne and Batman has become increasingly blurred. At first, Batman's transformation into the Dark Knight seemed to be an inevitable consequence of his trauma. In the early stages of his career as Gotham's protector, he still held on to some semblance of his humanity. He cared for those around him. Alfred, his loyal butler, and Robin, his first sidekick, were both witnesses to Bruce's ongoing emotional battle. But as time wore on, Batman began to lose more and more of the man he once was. His focus on his war against crime grew all-consuming, and the emotional toll began to erode his connections to the world. His relationship with Alfred, once his father figure and closest confidant, began to deteriorate as Batman pushed him away. The more Batman fought, the more isolated he became. Gotham's greatest protector had no time for love, friendship, or anything resembling a normal life. Batman was a man defined only by his mission, and that mission was all that mattered. This emotional isolation created a vicious cycle. Batman's trauma kept him from engaging with others, and his inability to connect with those who cared about him made his trauma worse. The more Batman tried to block out his pain, the more it consumed him. In his attempt to protect Gotham from harm, he inadvertently turned his back on the very people he was fighting to save. Gotham's citizens, though they admired Batman's strength and courage, were left to wonder who Batman really was. Behind the mask, beneath the layers of intimidation and strength, was a man who had long since lost touch with the world around him. The psychological cost of Batman's obsession is evident in the way he pushes away even the people who offer him a lifeline. Robin, perhaps the most important figure in Batman's life after Alfred, is the perfect example. As Bruce Wayne's emotional foundation continues to crumble, he finds himself unable to truly connect with the young boy who looks to him for guidance. Instead of a father-son relationship, the dynamic between Batman and Robin becomes more strained. Batman's inability to trust Robin, to allow him to share in the emotional burden of Gotham's struggle, speaks to Batman's refusal to let anyone close. He cannot afford emotional attachment because he is too afraid of losing someone else. This fear, born out of trauma, has created a barrier between Batman and everyone around him. Robin, along with Alfred, becomes a figure kept at arm's length. Batman's emotional walls only grow higher, pushing away the very people who would care for him, and in doing so, he loses a part of himself, the ability to love, to connect, and to heal. In his attempts to remain detached and focused, Batman also pushes away the idea of hope, an essential aspect of humanity. Batman, in his dark and brooding persona, refuses to believe in the possibility of true redemption for Gotham. His obsession with preventing crime, even at the expense of his own emotional well-being, has left Gotham in a state of perpetual violence and decay. Batman's inability to trust the systems that could restore order, such as the Gotham City Police Department or the legal system, reveals a profound flaw in his approach. He believes that only through his personal intervention Only through his obsession with justice can Gotham be saved. Yet, in doing so, he neglects the possibility that Gotham's healing might come from something other than endless vigilantism. Batman's refusal to accept that there are things he cannot control, things beyond his reach, speaks to the limits of his humanity. A truly human response would involve vulnerability, the acceptance that sometimes, in the face of overwhelming odds, we must allow others to help us. But Batman's war against crime is not a fight that can be won alone, and his refusal to accept this is a direct cause of his psychological and emotional decline. Batman's moral absolutism also plays a significant role in his emotional and psychological isolation. Batman is driven by an unyielding belief in his personal moral code, which is defined by his refusal to kill. While this strict moral code might seem admirable at first glance, it has deepened Batman's descent into an emotional abyss. Batman's no-kill rule, while a way of distinguishing himself from the criminals he battles, has created a dichotomy in his actions. He punishes criminals without mercy, sometimes leading to their death or suffering, but he refuses to take the final step. This unwillingness to kill creates an internal tension, one that slowly eats away at Batman's soul. The Joker, in particular, is a symbol of this paradox. The Joker, the embodiment of chaos, cannot be permanently defeated because Batman refuses to kill him. But in refusing to kill, Batman also allows the Joker to continue his rampage. This moral conflict is a constant source of stress and guilt for Batman. His rigid adherence to his code, which is supposed to define him as a force for good, instead traps him in a never-ending battle that erodes his sense of self. This moral absolutism isolates Batman from the very essence of humanity. The recognition that there are no perfect answers, that life is messy, and that redemption and justice are complicated. Batman's refusal to acknowledge the complexity of life and morality forces him to operate in absolutes, unable to recognize the nuances of human behavior. In refusing to kill, Batman has not just created a moral paradox, he has cut himself off from the natural human experience of growth, forgiveness, and learning from mistakes. His obsession with justice, his inability to see the bigger picture, has created a man who is not just detached from society, but detached from himself. This emotional and psychological strain comes to a head in Batman's relationships with his most dangerous foes. Gotham's most notorious villains, the Joker, Bane, Two-Face, are not just enemies for Batman to defeat, they are reflections of his own fractured psyche. Each of these villains represents a dark mirror to Batman's own obsession with order and control. The Joker, in particular, serves as a symbol of Batman's own inner chaos. The Joker is everything that Batman fears becoming. A man consumed by madness, a force of pure anarchy who delights in destroying the very concept of justice that Batman holds dear. But in battling the Joker, Batman is not just fighting crime, he is fighting a part of himself. The Joker's insistence that all it takes is one bad day to turn a man into a monster strikes at the heart of Batman's moral dilemma. Batman knows that, deep down, he could become the Joker. His refusal to kill, his obsessive nature, and his moral absolutism could very easily lead him down a path where he becomes a reflection of everything he despises. But Batman refuses to face this truth. Instead of confronting the fact that his obsession is slowly destroying him, he doubles down on his war against crime. His refusal to see that his actions are perpetuating the very chaos he is trying to eliminate forces him further away from the person he once was. His constant struggle with his own darkness, his refusal to accept that he cannot control everything, ensures that he remains trapped in a cycle of violence and emotional isolation. Batman is a man who has lost his humanity, not because he does not feel, but because he has refused to allow himself to feel anything that might weaken his resolve. His trauma, his moral code, and his obsession with justice have created a man who is no longer human in the truest sense. He is a symbol of vengeance, fear, and control, but the man behind the mask is a shadow of the boy who once dreamed of a world where he could make a difference. Batman has sacrificed his humanity for a cause that may never be won. His obsession with justice, his emotional isolation, and his refusal to accept the complexity of life and morality have hollowed him out. He is a man defined by his mission, but that mission has consumed him, leaving him with nothing but the darkness of his own mind. Batman's humanity is lost, not because he chooses evil, but because he has chosen a path that has isolated him from the human connections and emotions that make life worth living. His war on crime is endless, and as long as Batman continues to fight, Gotham will never know peace. But the true tragedy is that Batman, in trying to save Gotham, has lost himself in the process. One of the most poignant aspects of Batman's evolution from Bruce Wayne to the Dark Knight is the psychological self-destruction that defines his every action. His existence as Batman has been driven by a need for retribution, to avenge the deaths of his parents, and to ensure that no one else suffers the same fate. However, this obsession with revenge has transformed into an all-consuming mission that has stripped Batman of any remaining connection to the world outside of his fight for justice. It is as though Batman's war on crime is a battle not just for Gotham, but against the darkness inside of himself, and in doing so, he has slowly sacrificed everything that made him human. His relationships, his emotions, and his very sense of self. Bruce Wayne, the man who once had hope, love, and potential, is no longer the person who wears the cowl. In his pursuit of justice, Batman has embraced the very thing he once despised: detachment. He isolates himself from the world around him, believing that only through solitude can he fulfill his mission. Every choice Batman makes, from his emotional distance to his obsessive control over Gotham's fate, has led him to a place where he no longer seeks to understand those he protects. Instead, he merely reacts, always ready to fight the next battle, always seeking the next villain to defeat. This self-destructive cycle, however, is not just external. Batman's emotional and psychological health has deteriorated because of his inability to let go. His trauma, rooted in the violent deaths of his parents, has shaped every decision he makes. He is haunted by the idea that, had he been stronger, had he been there, he could have saved them. And so, he channels all that energy into his mission. But instead of healing from this trauma, Batman becomes increasingly consumed by it. His obsessive need to right the wrongs of his past prevents him from moving forward. Gotham cannot heal because Batman cannot heal. Batman's war on crime has become his crutch, the very thing that enables him to avoid dealing with the emotional wreckage he has created within himself. This inability to confront his own pain is what perpetuates Gotham's suffering. Every time Batman fights crime, every time he defeats a villain or quashes a criminal syndicate, he is no closer to restoring Gotham. His methods, while effective in the short term, are self-perpetuating in the long run. Gotham's criminals do not simply go away. They adapt, becoming more dangerous and more insane with every passing encounter. Batman's actions, instead of putting an end to crime, serve to escalate it. In the process, Batman loses even more of himself, turning into a figure more defined by his violence and fear than by his compassion. This constant battle against himself, against the darkness within him, is a major contributing factor to Batman's slow loss of his humanity. He has become the embodiment of a man who cannot forgive, who cannot forget, and who refuses to accept that his efforts to fight crime will never be enough. Gotham cannot be saved by violence alone, and Batman's inability to acknowledge this creates a tragic cyclical pattern that continues to fuel both his mission and his mental decline. The more he tries to impose order on Gotham, the more disorder arises. Batman's fight is not against Gotham's criminals. It is against his own grief, his own anger, and his own inability to move on from the trauma of his childhood. One of the fundamental elements of humanity is the ability to empathize, to understand the pain and suffering of others, and to feel a sense of connection with them. Batman, at his core, is a man driven by the desire to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. He was once someone who felt deeply for those around him, someone who had a connection to the people he vowed to protect. But as his war on crime deepens, Batman's ability to empathize with others begins to deteriorate. His singular focus on his mission pushes him further away from the very people he is supposed to protect. In the early days of his crusade, Batman still had a sense of connection to Gotham's citizens. He worked with the police, collaborated with his allies, and made an effort to maintain his humanity. However, as his battles grew more intense and as the stakes became higher, Batman began to cut himself off emotionally. His sense of empathy became clouded by his need for control and his obsession with justice. Over time, this detachment grew until Batman no longer seemed like the protector of Gotham, but its judge, jury, and executioner. Batman's relationships with his allies are a testament to this emotional disconnection. Take, for example, his relationship with Robin. In the beginning, Robin was Batman's partner, a fellow fighter in the war against crime. But over time, Batman's treatment of Robin, and later Batgirl and others, became more strained. His refusal to trust anyone to carry the weight of his mission speaks to his emotional distance. Batman insists on working alone because he believes no one can understand the burden he bears. His reluctance to let others share the responsibility of protecting Gotham speaks to a profound lack of trust and, more importantly, a lack of empathy. He has lost the ability to see those around him as human beings with their own emotions and struggles. Instead, they are tools, extensions of his mission, meant to serve a singular purpose: to fight crime. This lack of empathy also affects Batman's interactions with Gotham's criminals. Batman's rigid moral code, his refusal to kill, and his unyielding commitment to justice means he cannot truly see the humanity in the very criminals he seeks to stop. Gotham's villains, while clearly morally corrupt and dangerous, are in many ways also reflections of Batman's own psyche. The Joker, in particular, is a reflection of Batman's inability to reconcile his own darkness. The Joker is Batman's opposite, a villain driven by chaos and madness. Batman's refusal to kill him, his unwillingness to acknowledge that some threats can only be eliminated through death, shows that Batman has lost the ability to see beyond his black and white moral code. He has become so focused on his own sense of justice that he can no longer see the humanity in others, even those he seeks to protect or stop. By distancing himself from others emotionally and by treating everyone around him, even his allies, as means to an end, Batman has alienated himself from the very qualities that make him human. His inability to feel empathy for the people he is supposed to protect has turned him into a symbol of fear rather than hope. Gotham's citizens, who once looked to Batman as a protector, now view him as a cold, distant figure, someone who may save them from crime, but at the cost of their very humanity. One of the fundamental elements of humanity is the ability to empathize, to understand the pain and suffering of others, and to feel a sense of connection with them. Batman, at his core, is a man driven by the desire to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. He was once someone who felt deeply for those around him, someone who had a connection to the people he vowed to protect. But as his war on crime deepens, Batman's ability to empathize with others begins to deteriorate. His singular focus on his mission pushes him further away from the very people he is supposed to protect. In the early days of his crusade, Batman still had a sense of connection to Gotham's citizens. He worked with the police, collaborated with his allies, and made an effort to maintain his humanity. However, as his battles grew more intense, and as the stakes became higher, Batman began to cut himself off emotionally. His sense of empathy became clouded by his need for control and his obsession with justice. Over time, this detachment grew, until Batman no longer seemed like the protector of Gotham, but its judge, jury, and executioner. Batman's relationships with his allies are a testament to this emotional disconnection. Take, for example, his relationship with Robin. In the beginning, Robin was Batman's partner, a fellow fighter in the war against crime. But over time, Batman's treatment of Robin, and later Batgirl and others, became more strained. His refusal to trust anyone to carry the weight of his mission speaks to his emotional distance. Batman insists on working alone because he believes no one can understand the burden he bears. His reluctance to let others share the responsibility of protecting Gotham speaks to a profound lack of trust, and more importantly, a lack of empathy. He has lost the ability to see those around him as human beings with their own emotions and struggles. Instead, they are tools, extensions of his mission, meant to serve a singular purpose: to fight crime. This lack of empathy also affects Batman's interactions with Gotham's criminals. Batman's rigid moral code, his refusal to kill, and his unyielding commitment to justice means he cannot truly see the humanity in the very criminals he seeks to stop. Gotham's villains, while clearly morally corrupt and dangerous, are in many ways also reflections of Batman's own psyche. The Joker, in particular, is a reflection of Batman's inability to reconcile his own darkness. The Joker is Batman's opposite, a villain driven by chaos and madness. Batman's refusal to kill him, his unwillingness to acknowledge that some threats can only be eliminated through death, shows that Batman has lost the ability to see beyond his black and white moral code. He has become so focused on his own sense of justice that he can no longer see the humanity in others, even those he seeks to protect or stop. By distancing himself from others emotionally and by treating everyone around him, even his allies, as means to an end, Batman has alienated himself from the very qualities that make him human. His inability to feel empathy for the people he is supposed to protect has turned him into a symbol of fear rather than hope. Gotham's citizens, who once looked to Batman as a protector, now view him as a cold, distant figure, someone who may save them from crime, but at the cost of their very humanity. One of the fundamental elements of humanity is the ability to empathize, to understand the pain and suffering of others, and to feel a sense of connection with them. Batman, at his core, is a man driven by the desire to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. He was once someone who felt deeply for those around him, someone who had a connection to the people he vowed to protect. But as his war on crime deepens, Batman's ability to empathize with others begins to deteriorate. His singular focus on his mission pushes him further away from the very people he is supposed to protect. In the early days of his crusade, Batman still had a sense of connection to Gotham's citizens. He worked with the police, collaborated with his allies, and made an effort to maintain his humanity. However, as his battles grew more intense, and as the stakes became higher, Batman began to cut himself off emotionally. His sense of empathy became clouded by his need for control and his obsession with justice. Over time, this detachment grew, until Batman no longer seemed like the protector of Gotham, but its judge, jury, and executioner. Batman's relationships with his allies are a testament to this emotional disconnection. Take, for example, his relationship with Robin. In the beginning, Robin was Batman's partner, a fellow fighter in the war against crime. But over time, Batman's treatment of Robin, and later Batgirl and others, became more strained. His refusal to trust anyone to carry the weight of his mission speaks to his emotional distance. Batman insists on working alone because he believes no one can understand the burden he bears. His reluctance to let others share the responsibility of protecting Gotham speaks to a profound lack of trust, and more importantly, a lack of empathy. He has lost the ability to see those around him as human beings with their own emotions and struggles. Instead, they are tools, extensions of his mission, meant to serve a singular purpose: to fight crime. This lack of empathy also affects Batman's interactions with Gotham's criminals. Batman's rigid moral code, his refusal to kill, and his unyielding commitment to justice means he cannot truly see the humanity in the very criminals he seeks to stop. Gotham's villains, while clearly morally corrupt and dangerous, are in many ways also reflections of Batman's own psyche. The Joker, in particular, is a reflection of Batman's inability to reconcile his own darkness. The Joker is Batman's opposite, a villain driven by chaos and madness. Batman's refusal to kill him, his unwillingness to acknowledge that some threats can only be eliminated through death, shows that Batman has lost the ability to see beyond his black and white moral code. He has become so focused on his own sense of justice that he can no longer see the humanity in others, even those he seeks to protect or stop. By distancing himself from others emotionally, and by treating everyone around him, even his allies, as means to an end, Batman has alienated himself from the very qualities that make him human. His inability to feel empathy for the people he is supposed to protect has turned him into a symbol of fear rather than hope. Gotham's citizens, who once looked to Batman as a protector, now view him as a cold, distant figure, someone who may save them from crime, but at the cost of their very humanity. Batman's descent into emotional isolation is not a gradual process, but rather one that accelerates as his war on crime deepens. When Bruce Wayne first put on the mantle of Batman, it was with the noble intention of seeking justice for his parents' deaths and ridding Gotham of its rampant criminal element. However, over the years, the very act of fighting crime, of dedicating himself completely to a mission of vengeance, slowly began to erode the man he once was. The trauma of his childhood, particularly the murder of his parents, remained an unresolved wound that shaped his every action. Rather than finding a way to move on or heal from the pain, Batman channeled it into his relentless mission. But the more he immersed himself in his battle against crime, the more he distanced himself from the humanity he once embodied. In this journey, Batman's desire to right the wrongs of his past became so all-consuming that it left him little room for personal connection or emotional growth. The emotional isolation Batman suffers from is perhaps his greatest tragedy. Though he has allies, Alfred, Robin, Batgirl, and others, His refusal to allow anyone to truly understand him or share the burden of his mission reflects a profound emotional numbness. Batman has become so focused on his goal of protecting Gotham that he has lost the capacity for empathy, not just for the criminals he fights, but for the people who care about him. His relationship with Alfred, once a close bond between father and son, deteriorates over time as Batman pushes away the only person who truly understands him. Alfred remains loyal, trying to offer support, but Batman's constant drive to fight alone leads him to shut out the one person who has been with him through it all. This emotional detachment only grows as Batman continues his crusade. His relationship with Robin is a poignant example of how he has become increasingly removed from the human connections that once defined him. While Robin, as a sidekick and partner, might seem to offer Batman an opportunity for emotional healing and connection, Batman's inability to trust anyone, including his trusted ward, keeps him isolated. He treats Robin less as a partner and more as a tool, a weapon to be wielded in his fight against Gotham's criminals. The more Batman distances himself emotionally, the more his connection to his own humanity fades. Robin, who initially looked up to Batman as a mentor, ultimately begins to question Batman's methods, his emotional detachment, and his obsessive need for control. Robin represents everything Batman has lost: trust, love, and the ability to connect with others. Even his relationship with Gotham's citizens is marked by a profound lack of emotional engagement. While he may have once fought for the well-being of the people of Gotham, the longer Batman remains in his role as the Dark Knight, the more he becomes a symbol of fear rather than hope. Gotham citizens no longer see Batman as a protector. They see him as a dark, brooding figure who operates outside the law, dispensing justice in his own way, with no one to hold him accountable. Batman has become an entity that exists only to fight crime, but he has forgotten why he began his crusade in the first place. His mission to protect Gotham has consumed him to the point where he can no longer see the people he's fighting for as anything but pawns in his personal war. Gotham, in turn, becomes a reflection of Batman's inner darkness, a city that cannot heal because it is continually shaped by the very force that is supposed to save it. At the core of this emotional isolation is Batman's belief that he must remain detached to protect himself and those around him. He believes that to be a hero, he must be beyond human, beyond emotion, beyond the weaknesses that make him vulnerable. But in doing so, Batman has stripped away the very essence of what makes him human, his ability to love, to feel, and to connect with others. In his obsession with his mission, he has become a figure who exists only for that purpose, leaving behind the man who once had the capacity to care. The more Batman distances himself from his emotions, the more he loses the very humanity that makes him relatable, that makes him a hero. He becomes less of a man and more of an idea, a symbol of justice that is defined by his actions and his moral code, rather than the emotions that drive them. The most tragic aspect of this transformation is that, despite his noble intentions, Batman cannot recognize the damage he is causing to himself and to those around him. His trauma, which should have been a catalyst for healing, has instead become the source of his emotional destruction. His inability to confront his past, to acknowledge the grief and loss that shaped him, has led him to a place where he cannot move forward. Instead of evolving into a hero who is capable of feeling empathy and compassion, Batman has become a figure who is trapped in a never-ending cycle of violence and fear. The more he fights crime, the more he becomes a part of the very chaos he seeks to eliminate. Gotham cannot heal because Batman cannot heal. His refusal to confront his own darkness, his own grief, has created a situation where he can never truly be the hero Gotham needs. This loss of humanity is not simply a result of Batman's actions. It is the consequence of his mindset, his moral absolutism. The belief that there is only one way to bring justice to Gotham has created a rigidity in his thinking that prevents him from seeing the complexities of the world around him. Batman's refusal to bend, to work within the system, to trust others, has led him to a place where he can no longer empathize with the people he is trying to protect. His obsession with control, with making Gotham a safe place by his standards, has made him blind to the nuances of justice. Batman does not see the gray areas. He only sees black and white. This inability to understand the complexity of human nature, to accept that people are flawed, that the world is not perfect, is a defining characteristic of his loss of humanity. It has turned him into a machine of justice, operating on a set of rigid rules, devoid of the flexibility that allows for understanding and compassion. What's perhaps most unsettling about Batman's emotional decline is the toll it takes on his psyche. He is not just fighting criminals in Gotham. He is fighting against his own emotions, his own trauma. Batman's mission, in a way, is an act of self-punishment. He believes that by stopping crime, by punishing the guilty, he can somehow atone for the loss of his parents. But in reality, Batman's actions are not about justice. They are about vengeance. He is not saving Gotham for the sake of the people. He is saving it to prove something to himself. The more Batman engages in his war, the more he becomes trapped in the very emotions he is trying to suppress. His refusal to let go of his past keeps him from embracing the future. Gotham's chaos is a direct reflection of his inner turmoil. His obsession with fixing the city is rooted in his inability to confront his own brokenness. Batman's inability to heal, to connect, and to evolve emotionally makes him less human than he once was. The very qualities that make us human, love, connection, vulnerability, empathy, are all missing from Batman's life. He has become a symbol of fear and control, but the cost of that fear is his humanity. Batman's belief that he must remain detached, that he must sacrifice his emotions to be a hero, has created a man who no longer understands what it means to be human. In the pursuit of justice, Batman has lost the ability to feel. He has become the very thing he despises, a figure defined by fear, trauma, and vengeance, rather than compassion, understanding, and love. As Batman's obsession with justice continues, it becomes apparent that his mission is not one of healing or redemption, but one of self-inflicted punishment. His deep-seated need to restore Gotham, to avenge his parents, and to rid the world of crime stems from a belief that the suffering he endured must be repaid, not just by his personal actions, but through constant sacrifice. His emotional detachment, then, is not a byproduct of his trauma, but a core component of his identity. To be Batman, he must push aside all emotions, all human connections, and become something else entirely, a force of nature, a figure who exists solely for the purpose of bringing order to a city consumed by chaos. What's most tragic about this transformation is that Batman has essentially become the very thing he was trying to prevent. His trauma, his need for vengeance, and his pursuit of justice have led him to adopt the same behaviors he once hated. Batman has become a figure defined by his own brand of moral absolutism, where the only true right is what he determines to be so. In his efforts to eliminate the criminal element in Gotham, he has adopted a by-any-means-necessary mentality, which increasingly blurs the line between good and evil. His refusal to accept that no one can be perfectly just, no one can be completely righteous, has led him to become a vigilante who punishes rather than rehabilitates, isolates rather than connects, and controls rather than understands. The very act of Batman wearing the cowl and becoming the Dark Knight has distanced Bruce Wayne from his true self. Batman's humanity is sacrificed each time he dons the mask, because the persona he creates is one defined by fear and control. The Batman is not human. He is a symbol, and by becoming this symbol, Batman has created a divide between himself and the world around him. He has sacrificed his ability to feel and empathize with those he protects in favor of a mission that can never be completed. Gotham cannot be saved by fear, nor can Batman's own soul be redeemed through endless battles with criminals. But because Batman refuses to face his own humanity, to confront his pain, his emotions, his need for connection, he remains trapped in this perpetual cycle. This conflict is particularly evident in Batman's struggle to engage with others. His relationships with figures such as Robin, Batgirl, and even Alfred are often marred by Batman's inability to trust or emotionally invest in those who care for him. His refusal to let others in, to share the weight of his mission, speaks to his profound sense of loneliness and emotional exhaustion. Batman's belief that he must bear the burden of Gotham's salvation alone is a direct consequence of his detachment from his humanity. He has built walls around himself so high that no one can reach him, and by doing so, he has become a tragic figure, endlessly fighting not only for Gotham, but for his own emotional survival. This self-imposed isolation ensures that Batman will never be able to connect with anyone deeply again. His obsession with being alone in his fight for justice has created a man who can never experience the emotional richness that human relationships offer. Batman's obsession with control also extends to the criminals he fights. His rigid moral code, particularly his refusal to kill, shows the extent to which he believes that he, and only he, can mete out justice. However, this uncompromising stance also reveals Batman's inability to see the complexities of human nature. Gotham's criminals, especially figures like the Joker, Two-Face, and the Riddler, are reflections of the very traits that Batman denies in himself. They represent the chaos and disorder that Batman refuses to acknowledge. The Joker, in particular, is a direct challenge to Batman's entire worldview. Where Batman sees justice, the Joker sees madness and absurdity. Where Batman seeks control, the Joker seeks to break all boundaries. But the tragedy is that Batman's refusal to engage with the Joker, to understand the chaos the Joker represents, has only led to his own emotional unraveling. Batman's refusal to kill or accept the realities of crime has created an unstable environment where criminals like the Joker are allowed to thrive, and Gotham remains caught in a never-ending spiral of chaos. Even more disturbing is the fact that Batman, in his obsession with fighting crime, has inadvertently turned Gotham into a mirror of his own fractured mind. Gotham is a city defined by its corruption, violence, and lawlessness, but it is also a city defined by Batman's presence. Gotham cannot be healed because Batman cannot heal. His inability to confront his own trauma, his fixation on crime as the ultimate evil, and his detachment from humanity ensure that Gotham will always need him, and yet never be saved. The city is stuck in a cycle of violence because Batman refuses to address the root cause of that violence: his own emotional isolation and moral rigidity. The most tragic aspect of Batman's transformation is that it makes him a prisoner of his own creation. He has become so consumed by his mission to avenge his parents and to restore justice that he has lost sight of who he truly is. Batman is no longer Bruce Wayne. He is the Dark Knight, a symbol of vengeance and fear. And in becoming this symbol, Batman has stripped away the qualities that once made him a man: empathy, love, and connection. He is not just a man with a mission, he is a machine driven by pain and trauma, devoid of the humanity that once defined him. The culmination of Batman's journey is a realization that he has in fact lost his humanity. His obsession with Gotham, with crime, and with the need for control has left him emotionally bankrupt. He is a symbol, but that symbol is defined not by the values he once held dear, but by the trauma he has never confronted. Batman's journey is not one of heroism, but of self-destruction. The more he fights, the more he loses himself. His need to maintain control, his refusal to trust others, and his inability to let go of the pain of his past have created a figure who is more machine than man. Gotham may need Batman, but Batman needs Gotham even more. The cycle between them is inescapable. The more Batman tries to fight for justice, the more he becomes consumed by the very forces he seeks to control. Gotham is trapped in the same cycle of chaos that Batman is trapped in, and until he is able to confront his own trauma, Gotham will never find peace. Batman's greatest tragedy is not his inability to defeat crime, but his inability to defeat the darkness within himself. The most unsettling aspect of Batman's transformation is that it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't the result of one traumatic event, nor was it the consequence of a single bad decision. It was a gradual erosion of his humanity, a slow and steady breakdown of the very qualities that once defined Bruce Wayne: empathy, compassion, and the ability to love. Over time, these qualities were replaced by an unyielding desire for justice and control. His mission, once a noble pursuit to bring order to a city rife with corruption, slowly became his identity. Every decision Batman made, every move he took against Gotham's criminals, pushed him further away from the man he once was. What started as a heroic impulse to save Gotham from its darkest corners has morphed into an obsession so consuming that it leaves no room for anything else. Batman has become so entangled in his mission that he cannot see the full consequences of his actions. He believes or convinces himself that he is the only one capable of saving Gotham. But this belief is built on the false notion that Gotham's problems can be solved through violence, fear, and control. He fails to see that the very nature of his crusade is what perpetuates the cycle of crime and corruption. His inability to trust anyone else, to work within the system, and to accept help has made him not a savior, but a product of Gotham's dysfunction. Batman's crusade is driven by an absolute sense of justice, but that justice is rooted in vengeance, not a desire for true peace or fairness. Batman has created his own rigid moral framework, one that is deeply influenced by his trauma and his need for retribution. His refusal to kill, to cross the line even when faced with the most dangerous of criminals, may seem like a noble choice, but it reveals a deeper flaw in his understanding of justice. His no-kill rule, rather than distinguishing him from the criminals he fights, has become a prison of his own making. It forces him to constantly revisit the same battles, to fight the same villains who return again and again, each time more extreme than the last. His very refusal to kill creates a system where crime can never truly be eradicated, and where the cycle of violence perpetuates itself. This philosophical conflict, the belief that justice can only be achieved by his terms, reflects a larger crisis of identity. Batman is no longer Bruce Wayne, the young boy who dreamed of a world free from the pain he witnessed. He has become a figure who operates outside of the moral and legal systems of Gotham, unable to see the consequences of his own actions. He has embraced a role that has no end, a battle that is never finished, an enemy that will never be fully defeated. His insistence on fighting crime without any real system of accountability or cooperation with others has turned him into a creature of vengeance, more defined by his mission than by his ability to connect with others. The idea of Batman as a symbol rather than a man becomes more evident as we consider his emotional and psychological state. Gotham has become the battleground for his inner demons, and the very city he seeks to protect has come to represent the chaos he cannot escape. Gotham's crime and corruption mirror Batman's own internal conflict. The more he tries to impose order, the more disorder grows. Gotham's villains, from the Joker to Bane, represent the darkness that exists not just in the city, but in Batman himself. They challenge him, force him to confront the very nature of his existence. The Joker, in particular, embodies the antithesis to Batman's moral code, showing that justice, when pursued without compassion or understanding, can become a form of madness. The Joker forces Batman to question the cost of his mission. Can one truly bring order to a world without understanding the complexity of human behavior? Is Batman, in his obsessive quest to protect Gotham, becoming just as monstrous as the criminals he fights? This paradox is the heart of Batman's struggle. He is both the hero Gotham needs and the villain it has created. His obsession with order has driven him to become a force of control, of fear, and of retribution. But in doing so, he has distanced himself from the very humanity that once defined him. He has become an emotionless machine, a figure defined by his need to punish rather than a man capable of love, forgiveness, and empathy. Gotham's criminals don't need Batman to thrive. They thrive because of him. The more Batman intervenes, the more Gotham becomes a playground for the worst of humanity, a place where chaos cannot be defeated by force alone. In this way, Batman is not just fighting the criminals of Gotham, he is fighting his own nature, his moral absolutism, his need to control everything, his refusal to recognize that true justice can't be defined by one person, have made him into a symbol of a war that can never be won. His inability to reconcile the complexities of human nature, and the failure to understand that crime cannot be stopped by violence alone, has created a world that is destined to remain in chaos. Batman's sense of self is tied to his mission, but in losing his humanity he becomes trapped in a never-ending cycle of violence and fear. The irony of Batman's transformation lies in the fact that his mission to save Gotham has, in the end, turned him into the very thing that keeps the city from healing. Gotham's decay mirrors Batman's own psychological unraveling. Each time he takes down one villain, another, more dangerous, rises to take their place. Each time he believes he has restored order, the city slips further into anarchy. Gotham's endless cycle of violence, its inability to heal, is a direct reflection of Batman's inability to confront his own trauma and his refusal to acknowledge the limitations of his mission. Gotham, much like Batman, is stuck in a cycle of despair, violence, and an emotional toll that can never be fully repaired. Batman, for all his heroism, has become a product of the very chaos he seeks to control. His obsession with saving the city has isolated him from the world, creating a version of justice that is cold, detached, and devoid of the empathy that makes us human. Batman's inability to see the larger picture, to understand that there are limits to what one person can do, has led him down a path where he cannot escape the darkness. He has become not just the Dark Knight, but a symbol of the internal struggle between order and chaos, a battle that will never cease because Batman cannot let go of the very thing that defines him. Batman's descent into darkness is not just a loss of his humanity, it is a loss of his connection to the world he is trying to protect. Gotham will never be free from crime and chaos, as long as Batman remains the city's protector. But Batman, just as much as Gotham, is stuck in his role. His war on crime is not just a battle for justice, it is a battle to confront his own demons, to reconcile the boy he was with the man he has become. Gotham needs Batman, but it also needs him to let go, to understand that his war on crime is a reflection of his own inner darkness, and that true justice can never be achieved through control, fear, and isolation. Batman's transformation began, ironically, with a noble pursuit to prevent the tragic loss he experienced as a child from happening to anyone else. This drive, born out of loss and trauma, was initially fueled by an intense sense of justice. He sought to bring order to Gotham and eradicate the criminal elements that contributed to its decay. However, the irony lies in the fact that, in his pursuit of this justice, Batman has not restored peace to Gotham. Instead, he has compounded the city's suffering. Gotham is trapped in a cycle where crime evolves, not in response to the inherent corruption of the city, but in direct reaction to Batman's existence. The more Batman fights to eliminate crime, the more entrenched and widespread crime becomes, giving rise to increasingly dangerous and unpredictable villains. Gotham's most notorious criminals are products of Batman's crusade, not simply because they were inherently evil, but because Batman's intervention forced them to adapt, grow more violent, and evolve into figures of pure chaos. The Joker, perhaps the most iconic of Batman's adversaries, is a perfect example of this. The Joker's existence is not a mere accident. It is a consequence of Batman's obsessive pursuit of order and control. The Joker thrives on chaos, and his nihilistic view of the world directly challenges Batman's moral absolutism. The Joker's primary goal is not wealth, revenge, or power, but to dismantle Batman's entire worldview, to prove that Batman's sense of justice, his no-kill rule, and his moral rigidity are illusions. The Joker does not fight for personal gain. He fights to expose the futility of Batman's mission. Each time Batman apprehends the Joker, each time he locks him away in Arkham, the Joker learns, adapts, and grows more dangerous. The cycle continues because Batman's obsession with control prevents him from truly understanding the nature of the problem he faces. Gotham's criminals aren't mere pawns to be defeated. They are reflections of Batman's own psychological conflict. The Joker is the embodiment of Batman's greatest fear, that he is, at his core, no different from the chaos he seeks to destroy. The cyclical nature of this struggle is compounded by Batman's moral absolutism. His refusal to kill criminals is both a sign of his dedication to a moral code and a deeply flawed perspective on justice. While Batman may believe that killing criminals would make him no better than those he fights, his rigid adherence to this principle has led to devastating consequences. Batman's unwillingness to kill allows Gotham's most dangerous criminals to survive and escape time and again. The Joker, for example, is allowed to continue his reign of terror, not because Batman cannot stop him, but because Batman refuses to take the final step and eliminate him. This creates a paradox in Batman's mission. By refusing to kill, Batman ensures that the very evil he fights continues to thrive, and the city he seeks to protect remains in a perpetual state of violence and fear. This moral rigidity, the belief that he must follow a set of rules that are as unyielding as the criminals he faces, reflects a deep psychological flaw in Batman's character. His obsession with control has turned him into a man who cannot acknowledge the complexities of life, of crime, or of human nature. Gotham's problems cannot be solved through sheer willpower or by adhering to a strict moral code. Yet Batman, in his refusal to acknowledge this, continues to fight the same battle over and over, trapped in a cycle of violence that serves no one. His obsession with moral purity has made him blind to the fact that his very actions perpetuate the chaos in Gotham. The more he fights, the more he ensures that the city remains in an endless state of disorder. Batman's emotional detachment also plays a significant role in his transformation. His desire to isolate himself, to work alone, is not just a tactical decision. It is a reflection of his inability to trust others. His relationships with people, both allies and adversaries, have become increasingly transactional. Batman has become an instrument of vengeance, a tool of justice, with little room for human connection. His emotional walls have created a version of Batman who is detached from the world, operating as a machine with no room for love, empathy, or care. The more Batman pushes others away, the more he becomes defined by his mission, rather than by the person he once was. The loss of Batman's humanity is made even more tragic by his relationship with Alfred. Alfred, who has been Batman's loyal confidant, surrogate father, and emotional anchor, has seen Batman's descent into darkness firsthand. Alfred's attempts to guide and care for Batman are met with resistance, as Batman refuses to let go of his mission and allow himself to heal. The more Batman isolates himself, the more Alfred is relegated to the role of an observer, watching as his once hopeful ward becomes a symbol of fear and isolation. Alfred knows that Bruce Wayne is still in there, somewhere, but the Batman persona has become so entrenched that it is hard to see where the man ends and the symbol begins. Even Batman's relationship with Robin is marred by his emotional detachment. Initially, Robin was Batman's partner, someone to share the burden of Gotham's protection, but as time passed, Batman's inability to allow Robin to take on equal responsibility for Gotham's salvation led to a growing divide between them. Batman's refusal to trust Robin, to let him take on a more active role in the fight against crime, speaks to the deep emotional isolation that defines Batman. Robin, who once looked up to Batman as a mentor and father figure, ultimately becomes disillusioned by Batman's emotional distance and single-minded focus on his mission. Robin's departure represents not just a fracture in their partnership, but a reflection of the emotional distance that Batman has created between himself and everyone he once cared about. Batman's inability to heal from his own trauma, his failure to recognize the complexity of human nature, and his emotional detachment have created a man who can no longer connect with the very people he is fighting to protect. His war on crime has turned him into a figure who operates on pure instinct, devoid of empathy or understanding. Gotham may need Batman, but Batman needs Gotham in a way that goes beyond simply protecting it. Gotham has become a reflection of Batman's inner turmoil. His obsessive need to control the city has turned it into a battleground where both he and the city are locked in an endless struggle, never truly finding peace. The ultimate tragedy of Batman's transformation is that, despite his best intentions, he has become a prisoner of his own creation. His obsession with justice, his refusal to acknowledge the complexities of morality, and his emotional isolation have turned him into a figure who no longer embodies the hope he once sought to protect. Gotham's endless cycle of violence, crime, and chaos is a reflection of Batman's inability to confront his own inner darkness. He has become the very thing he sought to destroy, a force that perpetuates the chaos he is trying to stop. Batman's war on crime has defined his existence, and yet it is this very mission that has led him to lose the essence of what it means to be human. His inability to relinquish control, to let go of his unshakable belief that he alone is capable of saving Gotham, has isolated him from the world. Batman's need for absolute control has become an obsession that is not only self-destructive, but ultimately futile. Gotham's endless crime and corruption are not eradicated by Batman's attempts to impose order. They are only perpetuated, and in some cases worsened. Every time Batman defeats a villain, another rises to take their place, sometimes even more dangerous and unpredictable. Batman's refusal to acknowledge that his methods are flawed, that he cannot single-handedly change the nature of Gotham, locks him in an unending cycle of conflict and frustration. The city is forever caught between the forces of order and chaos, and Batman, in his quest to restore balance, becomes the very thing that keeps it in turmoil. This paradox, that Batman's presence in Gotham ensures its perpetuation of violence and chaos, points to the deeper issue at play. Batman is incapable of seeing the broader picture. He believes that the solution to Gotham's problems lies in his own efforts, in his personal crusade against crime. But Gotham cannot heal under Batman's rigid worldview. His emotional isolation, his obsessive need to control the fate of the city, and his refusal to trust others have created a toxic dynamic. The very crime he seeks to eliminate thrives because of Batman's influence. Gotham's criminals, particularly figures like the Joker, Bane, and Two-Face, are products of Batman's war on crime. They are not merely motivated by greed, power, or revenge. They are driven by the fact that Batman, in his need to impose order, has forced them to evolve. The more Batman fights, the more Gotham's criminals adapt to his presence, growing more dangerous and unpredictable with each passing encounter. What makes this cycle so tragic is that Batman is caught in it. His belief that he is Gotham's only hope prevents him from recognizing that he is part of the problem, not the solution. Gotham needs not just a hero, but a system of justice that works from within the city, one that is not dependent on a single figure acting outside of the law. But Batman's refusal to relinquish control prevents him from working with the institutions that could help, like the police or the legal system. Instead, he operates in the shadows, outside the law, believing that only he can solve Gotham's problems. But this belief is built on a false premise that one man, no matter how skilled, can solve a city's systemic issues. Batman's failure to acknowledge that Gotham's problems are deeply ingrained and cannot be solved by force alone reveals the true cost of his existence. His obsession with vengeance, his belief that justice can only be served through his own brand of vigilantism, has consumed him to the point where he no longer sees the world as it is. Gotham is a city built on corruption and decay, but it is also a city of hope, of people who want to see it change. Batman has failed to tap into this hope. Instead, he remains stuck in a cycle of fighting crime without addressing the root causes of Gotham's suffering, its broken systems, its poverty, its social inequality. Batman's refusal to see these deeper issues prevents him from ever truly saving the city. He remains locked in a war that cannot be won, unable to acknowledge that Gotham's real healing comes not from endless violence, but from healing the wounds of its people, from rebuilding the institutions that have been fractured for so long. The tragic consequence of Batman's obsession with control is his emotional decline. The more he isolates himself, the more he cuts himself off from the people who could offer him support and care. His relationships with Alfred, Robin, Batgirl, and others suffer as Batman pushes them away. He refuses to trust anyone, believing that no one else can bear the burden of Gotham's protection. But in doing so, he has lost the capacity to connect with others. Gotham's citizens, who once saw Batman as a protector, now see him as a cold, distant figure. He is not someone who fights for them, but someone who fights to impose his own version of justice, a justice that is often harsh, unforgiving, and out of touch with the reality of the city's problems. This emotional distance between Batman and the world around him is reflected in his most iconic enemy, the Joker. The Joker represents everything Batman has tried to repress: chaos, unpredictability, and a rejection of order. While Batman seeks to impose control over Gotham, the Joker wants to prove that control is an illusion. The Joker's philosophy, that all it takes is one bad day to turn a man into a monster, reflects Batman's greatest fear, that he could become the very thing he fights against. The Joker forces Batman to confront the darkness within himself, to acknowledge that his obsession with justice, his refusal to let go of his trauma, and his rigid moral code could easily lead him down a path of destruction. The Joker is not just Batman's adversary, he is a mirror, showing Batman the depths of his own psychological and emotional decline. Yet Batman, in his arrogance and fear, refuses to see this. He continues his fight, believing that each victory over crime will bring him closer to peace, when in fact, it only deepens the cycle of violence. Batman's fight is not just against Gotham's criminals, it is a fight against his own inner demons. His refusal to acknowledge this, to confront his pain and his limitations, ensures that Gotham will remain trapped in an endless cycle of suffering. Batman's inability to confront his own humanity, his emotional wounds, and his need for control makes him less human than ever. He has become a machine of justice, a symbol of fear, but a man who has lost the ability to feel, to connect, and to heal. The central tragedy of Batman's journey is that his quest for justice has led him down a path where he can never truly achieve it. Gotham cannot heal because Batman cannot heal. His refusal to accept that some battles cannot be fought with force, that true justice requires compassion and understanding, has trapped him in an unending war. The city's problems are not just the result of criminality, they are the result of social, economic, and political systems that have failed. But Batman cannot see this. His obsession with his mission blinds him to the complexities of Gotham's situation. He remains a symbol of justice, but that symbol is defined not by the qualities that make him human, love, empathy, understanding, but by the trauma he has never confronted. In the end, Batman's war on crime is a reflection of his own emotional and psychological turmoil, his inability to connect with others, his refusal to heal from his trauma, and his rigid adherence to his moral code have turned him into a tragic figure. Gotham cannot be saved by violence alone, and Batman cannot save Gotham because he has lost the very thing that would allow him to heal his humanity. Gotham and Batman are locked in a cycle of violence and despair, one that can never be broken unless Batman is able to let go of his obsession with control and embrace the humanity he has long since discarded. At the heart of Batman's journey is the central theme of self-sacrifice. From the moment Bruce Wayne chose to become Batman, he dedicated himself to a life of sacrifice. His decision to fight for Gotham's future meant sacrificing his own personal happiness, his relationships, and his very humanity. Initially, this selflessness appeared noble. Batman was willing to risk everything, including his own life, to rid the world of crime and corruption. But over time, this self-sacrifice turned into something darker, Batman sacrificed not just his happiness, but his emotional and psychological well-being. His refusal to let anyone in, to trust anyone, has created an emotional void in his life. Gotham, as a reflection of his mission, mirrors this void, a city full of potential, yet overwhelmed by darkness and corruption. Batman, like the city he protects, has become trapped in a cycle of self-destruction where sacrifice and isolation have become the driving forces of his identity. In many ways, Batman's transformation is a direct consequence of his failure to accept the fundamental human need for connection. Human beings are social creatures. We rely on relationships, trust, and emotional bonds to survive and thrive. Batman, in his obsessive war against crime, has cut himself off from the world. His refusal to let anyone close, to trust in the people who care about him, has led him to a place where his humanity is no longer defined by the love and empathy he once had, but by the fear and control he exerts over Gotham. This emotional isolation has made him a figure who exists solely for his mission, with no room for personal connection or self-reflection. The emotional walls he has built around himself are so high that no one, not even those closest to him, can break through. Alfred, his surrogate father, is relegated to the role of an observer, a passive figure who watches as the man he raised slips further into darkness. This refusal to connect with others is not just an emotional shortcoming, it is a profound philosophical flaw. Batman's belief that he must fight alone, that no one else is capable of carrying the burden of Gotham's protection, reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be human. Batman's obsession with control, with making every decision, every action his own, has made him blind to the reality that true heroism involves collaboration, trust, and the ability to recognize the worth of others. Instead of building a coalition of allies, Batman isolates himself, turning his fight into a personal crusade. This self-imposed isolation prevents him from experiencing the very humanity that defines the heroes he once admired. This philosophical flaw is particularly evident in Batman's treatment of his allies, especially Robin. The relationship between Batman and Robin is symbolic of Batman's refusal to embrace human connection. When Robin first joined Batman in his war against crime, he offered a partnership. Together, they could have fought for Gotham's future, with each bringing their unique strengths to the fight. However, Batman's refusal to let Robin share in the full responsibility of protecting Gotham highlights his unwillingness to trust others, to allow anyone to take on the same burden he carries. Instead, Robin becomes an extension of Batman's will, a tool in his mission, rather than a true partner. This dynamic reflects Batman's belief that only he can be Gotham's savior, that no one else can bear the weight of the city's suffering. The cost of this emotional detachment is evident in the way Batman views his villains. Gotham's criminals, once individual manifestations of the city's corruption, have become more than just threats to be eliminated. They are reflections of Batman's own darkness. The Joker, the Riddler, Two-Face. All of these characters are not simply antagonists. They are aspects of Batman's own fractured psyche. They represent the chaos that Batman tries to suppress within himself. The Joker, in particular, challenges Batman's entire worldview, trying to show him that justice, when taken to extremes, is just as chaotic and destructive as the crime Batman is trying to stop. The Joker represents a chaos that Batman refuses to acknowledge, yet it is this very chaos that Batman has become a part of. The more Batman fights the Joker, the more he mirrors the villain's erratic and unstable nature. Batman's inability to understand this dark mirror is rooted in his moral absolutism. His belief that there is one way to achieve justice, by controlling and punishing the criminal element, prevents him from seeing the complexity of the human condition. Gotham's criminals are not inherently evil. They are products of a broken system of trauma, neglect, and despair. But Batman refuses to see this. His rigid moral code tells him that criminals must be punished without mercy, that Gotham's problems can be solved through force and intimidation. This belief makes it impossible for Batman to recognize the humanity in the very people he seeks to stop. He has turned himself into an agent of punishment rather than a force for healing. In doing so, he has lost sight of the very reason he became Batman: to protect Gotham, to create a better future, to stop the cycle of violence and loss that shaped his childhood. Batman's tragic flaw, his inability to see the world in shades of gray, is the reason why Gotham cannot be healed. His obsession with control, his refusal to allow anyone else to take on the burden of justice, and his emotional detachment have left Gotham in a state of perpetual violence and fear. Batman has not solved the problems of Gotham, he has perpetuated them. Every time he defeats a criminal, a new one rises to take their place. Gotham is not just a city plagued by crime, it is a city defined by Batman's presence. The chaos Batman seeks to eliminate has become part of his own identity. His refusal to accept that his war on crime cannot be fought alone has created a world where no one is truly safe, and no real progress can be made. The philosophy that Batman follows, one rooted in control, vengeance, and moral absolutism, has blinded him to the realities of the world he is trying to save. Gotham needs Batman, but it also needs him to understand that his methods are flawed. It needs him to confront his own emotional wounds, to embrace the possibility of collaboration, and to recognize that justice cannot be achieved through force alone. Batman's refusal to let go of his trauma, to trust others, and to acknowledge the complexities of human nature has made him a symbol of fear rather than hope. Gotham will never heal until Batman can face the truth about himself, that his quest for justice has become a self-destructive force, one that has stripped him of the very humanity he once sought to protect. What makes Batman's situation even more tragic is that, despite his best intentions, he has become the very thing he was trying to prevent. Gotham is not the city it could be, because Batman has made it a battleground. Gotham's chaos has been exacerbated by his existence, and as long as he remains Batman, the cycle of violence and fear will continue. The Batman has lost his humanity, not because he stopped caring about Gotham, but because his obsession with saving it has consumed him. Gotham needs Batman to see that the city can't be fixed by violence alone. It needs Batman to heal, to reconnect with the people who care about him, and to understand that his war on crime is not a solution. It is a symptom of the problem. Batman's fall from humanity isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a reflection of the fundamental flaw of vigilantism itself. Vigilantism, by its very nature, is a rebellion against the social systems that exist to maintain order and justice. It's an idea based on the assumption that the existing institutions, whether they are legal, political, or moral, are insufficient to ensure justice. Batman took this to heart. He believed that Gotham's political and judicial systems were irreparably broken, so he chose to operate outside of them. But by doing so, Batman also chose to forego the one thing that separates humans from animals: the ability to govern themselves through rational systems of law, fairness, and accountability. Batman's mission, born out of a deep sense of trauma and desire for control, slowly evolved into something that was no longer about justice, but about maintaining his sense of purpose. The more Batman sought to protect Gotham, the more he imposed his will upon it, effectively making himself judge, jury, and executioner. But in rejecting the idea that true justice can only be achieved through a cooperative society and functioning institutions, Batman has created a paradox. He has become a protector, yet a source of fear and instability. Gotham, without the institutions needed to govern itself, cannot heal. The criminals who exist in Gotham are not born out of nothing, they are born from the very system Batman has failed to repair. And yet, in his efforts to solve this problem with his own brand of justice, he has only ensured that Gotham's problems will never be solved. What is tragic about Batman's situation is the way he becomes a reflection of the very evil he seeks to destroy. As much as he strives to differentiate himself from Gotham's criminals by adhering to a moral code, he is increasingly becoming a figure of authoritarian control, defined by fear rather than empathy. His refusal to kill criminals, especially the most dangerous ones like the Joker, demonstrates the emotional and psychological rigidity that has overtaken him. Batman may believe that by refusing to kill, he is holding on to a moral high ground, but in reality, his insistence on following this rule has left him trapped. The criminals he faces are allowed to escape again and again because Batman refuses to take the final step. His refusal to kill isn't a testament to his humanity, it is ironically a sign of his inability to adapt, to evolve in the face of Gotham's perpetual decay. What's even more disturbing is that Batman's very mission, though born of a desire for good, has created its own breed of monsters. Take the Joker, for instance. The Joker is not just another villain in Batman's rogues gallery. He is the embodiment of what Batman has become, a force of pure chaos and destruction. The Joker thrives on Batman's inability to kill, constantly testing his moral boundaries and pushing him to the limit. The Joker's behavior is a reflection of Batman's own psychological state. Both are trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. The Joker represents the ultimate test of Batman's humanity. If Batman ever breaks his code, if he kills the Joker, he risks losing himself, becoming a murderer, becoming just like the criminals he fights. But by refusing to kill, Batman allows the Joker to live, to continue his rampage, further proving that his war on crime is flawed and ultimately futile. This cyclical nature, the endless battle between Batman and the Joker, between order and chaos, represents the eternal conflict that defines Batman's existence. It's a war that can never truly be won, not because the criminals are too strong, but because Batman's own psychological state makes it impossible for him to achieve lasting peace. Gotham's crime is not an external force that can be defeated with enough willpower. It is a manifestation of Batman's own trauma and the emotional scars that have been left by his parents' death. Every victory he achieves, every criminal he takes down, is only temporary. Gotham's criminals, like the Joker, are born from the very fears that Batman cannot escape. As long as Batman continues to fight crime, he will continue to create the very environment that allows these villains to rise. And as long as Batman continues to follow his strict moral code, he will never be able to confront the darkness within himself that fuels his obsession. What makes this especially tragic is the fact that Batman is incapable of seeing the solution to Gotham's problems because he is so entrenched in his personal sense of justice. To Batman, justice is a singular, absolute concept. His moral absolutism leaves no room for nuance, for compromise, or for understanding that true justice is complex and multifaceted. He believes that by following his code, by refusing to kill, he is standing apart from the criminals he fights. But the truth is that this moral rigidity makes him no different from the very criminals he seeks to punish. Batman has become an authoritarian figure obsessed with control, unable to see that justice cannot be imposed by a single person acting outside of the law. His refusal to trust anyone, his inability to recognize the complexity of human nature, and his obsession with vengeance have turned him into something less than human, a symbol that represents fear, not hope. The cost of Batman's transformation is not just personal. Gotham itself is a victim of Batman's rigid worldview. Gotham cannot heal while Batman is trapped in this cycle of vengeance and control. The city is not just defined by its criminals, it is defined by Batman's inability to trust its people, to trust the systems in place that could help to bring about change. Gotham's failure to evolve is in many ways a direct result of Batman's emotional isolation and his inability to evolve with it. The crime that plagues Gotham will never be eradicated by Batman's actions alone. What Gotham needs is not just a hero who can fight crime, but a leader who understands the need for collaboration, for system-wide change. Batman's unwillingness to allow anyone else to take responsibility for Gotham's fate ensures that the city will never be free of its corruption. As much as Batman tries to save Gotham, his continued detachment from the world around him ensures that the city will never heal. Gotham is not a city that can be restored through violence and fear alone. Batman's fight against crime has created a world where trust, cooperation, and understanding are impossible. His obsession with control has led to a situation where Gotham is locked in an eternal struggle. Batman is both the solution and the problem, a figure who has become a prisoner of his own creation. The cost of this emotional isolation is evident in the relationships Batman has with his allies. Alfred, the father figure who raised him, has become nothing more than a bystander, watching as Batman spirals further into his obsession. Robin, once Batman's partner and equal, has been relegated to a secondary role, forced to follow Batman's lead without ever being allowed to fully share in the responsibility of Gotham's protection. Batman has pushed away those who would help him, believing that only he can save Gotham. But in doing so, he has lost the very connections that would allow him to heal. Gotham needs Batman to understand that his actions have consequences, not just for the criminals he fights, but for the people he is trying to protect. Batman's internal conflict, driven by his trauma, is one of the most significant factors in his psychological unraveling. Bruce Wayne, a young boy with a full life ahead of him, had everything taken away in an instant. The murder of his parents left a wound so deep that he turned all his pain and grief into an obsessive drive for justice. This traumatic experience created the foundation for Batman, a figure whose sole purpose is to avenge his parents' deaths and rid Gotham of its criminal underworld. But in doing so, Batman has become trapped in a cycle of grief, vengeance, and unrelenting moral absolutism. Every choice he makes, from the decision to fight crime alone to his refusal to kill, is rooted in his unprocessed trauma. A trauma that has consumed him to the point where his humanity is barely recognizable. The trauma of Bruce's past has shaped his worldview, but it has also prevented him from ever truly healing. He chose to become Batman to fill the void left by the loss of his parents, but in doing so, he never allowed himself the chance to grieve and heal. His inability to let go of the past, to accept the fact that he cannot undo the tragedy that befell him, has kept him trapped in a state of perpetual emotional distress. His relentless pursuit of justice is not a form of redemption or healing. It is a form of punishment, both for the criminals he fights and for himself. Batman's refusal to acknowledge that he cannot erase the pain of his past has led him down a path where he continually sacrifices his emotional well-being for an ideal that can never be fully realized. Gotham cannot be saved through vengeance alone, and yet Batman's fixation on revenge has turned him into a figure who can never truly find peace. The more Batman isolates himself, the more his emotional isolation grows. Gotham, in many ways, is a reflection of Batman's internal state. The city is corrupt, broken, and full of chaos. Much like Batman's fractured psyche, Gotham's criminals, from the Joker to Bane to Two-Face, represent the very darkness within Batman himself, the chaotic force that he continually battles but cannot escape. Batman's very identity is defined by this struggle between order and chaos, and in the process, he has become just as obsessed with control as the criminals he fights. His moral absolutism, the belief that justice can only be achieved through his methods, blinds him to the fact that Gotham's true healing requires not just a vigilante, but a rebuilding of its social and institutional structures. Batman cannot solve Gotham's problems by fighting crime alone. The city's corruption runs deeper than the criminals he confronts. It is embedded in its system, its politics, its economy. But Batman, in his obsessive need to impose order, cannot see this larger picture. Instead of working within the system to create change, he operates outside of it, reinforcing the cycle of crime and violence in the process. The more Batman fights for Gotham, the more Gotham becomes a reflection of his own internal chaos. Batman cannot escape the paradox of his existence. The city needs him, but it is also the city's need for Batman that keeps it in a state of constant turmoil. Gotham cannot heal because Batman cannot heal. His refusal to confront his emotional wounds, his reliance on vengeance rather than understanding, and his obsession with control have turned him into a figure who is no longer human in any meaningful sense. His identity as Gotham's protector is based on his trauma, and his trauma is what keeps him locked in this eternal struggle. Gotham, like Batman, is stuck in a cycle of violence and despair, unable to move forward because both the city and its protector are defined by the very chaos they seek to eliminate. This paradox is most evident in Batman's relationships with others. Alfred, the one person who has remained constant in Batman's life, is a tragic figure in his own right. Alfred has spent years trying to guide Batman, to help him heal, and to remind him that there is more to life than fighting crime. But Batman, in his obsessive need to fight alone, has continually rejected Alfred's attempts at emotional connection. Alfred's role has become more of a caretaker, watching over Batman while Batman pushes him away. Alfred's loyalty to Batman is unwavering, yet he knows that Bruce Wayne is no longer the man he raised. Instead of a young man capable of forming relationships, of living a life of balance, Bruce has become a symbol of vengeance, of order, of justice, but a symbol that is increasingly defined by fear and control rather than compassion and empathy. In the same vein, Batman's relationship with Robin highlights his inability to trust or connect with others. Robin, the young boy, who once looked up to Batman as a mentor, has been forced to follow Batman's lead and live in the shadows of the Dark Knight. Batman's reluctance to share his burden, to allow Robin to step out of the shadow of the Bat and take on a more equal role in protecting Gotham, reflects his deep emotional isolation. Batman cannot see Robin as a partner, as someone who can help him carry the weight of Gotham's problems. Instead, Robin becomes a tool in Batman's fight, a way for Batman to continue his mission without truly letting go of the control he believes is necessary to save Gotham. Robin's growth as a hero is stunted, not because he lacks the potential, but because Batman refuses to let him fully evolve. This emotional distance keeps Robin in a secondary position, unable to become the hero he could be, unable to live up to his true potential. Furthermore, Batman's refusal to trust others extends to his relationships with the law enforcement of Gotham. Commissioner Gordon, a man Batman respects and frequently relies on, becomes just another figure who operates in the shadows of Batman's quest. Batman refuses to trust the police force in a city that is rife with corruption, choosing to act outside the law rather than work within it. Batman's need for control, his need to fight crime on his own terms, has prevented him from ever truly working alongside the city's institutions. Even when Gotham needs Batman and the police to unite against a greater threat, Batman remains emotionally isolated, fighting his battles in solitude. This reluctance to work with others speaks to the core of Batman's belief that only he can save Gotham. The tragic irony is that, in trying to save Gotham alone, Batman is making the city's problems worse. His inability to trust in others has turned him into a lone figure, constantly fighting a war that cannot be won through isolation and individualism alone. In his single-minded obsession with Gotham's safety, Batman has inadvertently alienated those he needs the most. He has become so consumed with his mission that he has forgotten what makes him human, the ability to connect, to empathize, to love. The loss of these qualities has turned him into a shadow of the man he once was. His connections with those closest to him are fractured, and Gotham in turn becomes a reflection of Batman's own internal decay. The city's darkness mirrors Batman's internal darkness, and until Batman is able to confront his own emotional wounds and allow himself to heal, Gotham will remain locked in this cycle of despair. The irony at the heart of Batman's journey is that his quest to save Gotham, to ensure no one else suffers the loss he did as a child, has led him to a point where he cannot even save himself. This is the ultimate tragedy of Batman's transformation. He became so consumed by his mission that he lost sight of the very thing he fought to protect, his humanity. Batman, in his obsessive need for control and perfection, has disconnected from his emotions, his sense of self, and the relationships that might allow him to heal. In his mind, Gotham's crime and corruption are personal affronts, a reflection of his own internal chaos. But instead of confronting this chaos, Batman channels it into an endless war against the criminal element. The problem, however, is that Batman's war against crime is not just a fight for Gotham's future, it is a way for Batman to deal with the unresolved pain and grief of his past. The loss of his parents has defined his entire existence, and every villain he faces, every criminal he defeats, is a way for him to feel that he is avenging that loss. But by fighting crime in this way, Batman only perpetuates his own pain. His need for vengeance and justice prevents him from moving past his trauma. The more he fights, the more entrenched in the darkness he becomes. Gotham may need Batman, but in his refusal to heal, he ensures that the cycle of violence and fear continues. The psychological impact of this self-destructive cycle is profound. Batman's obsession with his mission is rooted in his trauma, the belief that he must prevent others from experiencing the same loss he did. But the paradox is that the more he seeks to save Gotham from itself, the more he condemns it to an eternal struggle. Gotham's crime rates never decrease significantly. The criminals grow stronger, and Batman's emotional health deteriorates. The trauma that once drove Batman to act has become the thing that traps him. He cannot escape the cycle of vengeance and justice he has created because Gotham's problems and his personal pain are inseparable from his identity as Batman. The more he fights, the more it reinforces the idea that Gotham is beyond saving, that Gotham needs Batman in a way that no other solution can offer. The moral absolutism that Batman follows is another element of his gradual dehumanization. His commitment to never kill a criminal, no matter how dangerous, is emblematic of his deeply ingrained belief that he is the only one capable of deciding what is right or wrong in Gotham. While this moral code seems noble at first, it reflects a deeper issue. Batman has become so obsessed with controlling Gotham's fate that he can no longer see the gray areas of morality. Gotham's criminals, in Batman's eyes, are either good or evil, and his job is simply to punish them. But this rigid worldview only creates more chaos. Gotham's most dangerous criminals, the Joker, Bane, Two-Face, are not just villains to be defeated. They are reflections of the chaos within Batman himself. They are all symptoms of the larger issue, Batman's refusal to accept the complexities of human nature, and his inability to see that true justice requires more than just the application of a strict moral code. By refusing to take the extreme actions necessary to stop the chaos in Gotham, Batman inadvertently allows it to persist. His rigid moral absolutism prevents him from considering that maybe, just maybe, some criminals can never be reformed, and some crimes can only be stopped through extreme measures. What's equally tragic is Batman's inability to connect with others. His relationships with people are transactional at best and at worst, completely detached. His emotional distance from those around him, even Alfred, the one person who has been his constant companion, is stark. Alfred's presence is a reminder of the man Bruce Wayne used to be, a man capable of forming human connections. But Batman has pushed Alfred away, refusing to let him be a source of comfort or support. Alfred tries to remind Batman that he's still human, that there's more to life than fighting crime, but Batman is so consumed by his mission that he can no longer hear it. Alfred's pleas fall on deaf ears, and he's relegated to the role of a silent observer, watching as Bruce Wayne becomes increasingly defined by his persona as the Dark Knight. Batman's relationship with Robin, his most iconic partner, further exemplifies this emotional detachment. Robin, initially an ally, becomes a figure defined by Batman's need to control. Batman views Robin less as a partner and more as an extension of his own will. Batman's refusal to allow Robin to take on equal responsibility, his inability to see him as a peer, illustrates the emotional walls Batman has built around himself. Robin is not allowed to grow beyond Batman's expectations. He is simply another tool to serve Batman's mission. This dynamic is a direct result of Batman's obsession with control, his refusal to trust anyone to share the emotional burden of Gotham's protection. Robin, despite his capabilities, is never allowed to rise beyond the shadow of Batman. This emotional stunting reflects Batman's inability to embrace the true nature of teamwork, collaboration, and trust. Gotham's perpetual chaos is also a reflection of Batman's own inability to trust and let go of control. The more Batman isolates himself, the more Gotham becomes a city defined by its inability to move beyond its corrupt institutions. Batman, though a figure of power, has no real power over the city's long-term evolution. His presence is needed, yes, but Gotham cannot be saved by Batman alone. Gotham needs not just a protector, but a leader who understands that its problems are rooted in more than just crime. It needs someone who understands the role of community, of rebuilding systems, of trust. But Batman, in his obsession with control, cannot see this. He cannot see that the city's salvation will not come from fear alone, but from trust, collaboration, and healing. Gotham is stuck, because Batman is stuck, trapped in his own emotional turmoil, trapped in his war on crime, and unable to move forward. In the end, Batman's loss of humanity is a reflection of his failure to understand the true nature of heroism. Heroism is not about control, vengeance, or absolute justice. It is about sacrifice, understanding, and the willingness to embrace the humanity of those around you. Batman, by refusing to trust others, by cutting himself off emotionally, has become a tragic figure, forever locked in an endless struggle. He is both Gotham's greatest protector and its greatest curse. He is trapped by the very mission he created, unable to let go of his past, unable to trust the future, and unable to heal himself or the city. Gotham's chaos is not an external force. It is the direct result of Batman's own failure to acknowledge his humanity and the humanity of others. In conclusion, Batman's loss of humanity is a profound and tragic exploration of how a man's deepest trauma, his obsession with vengeance, and his rigid moral code can transform him from a hero into a symbol defined by fear and control. What started as a noble quest to protect Gotham and avenge the death of his parents has evolved into a never-ending cycle of violence and emotional isolation. Batman's refusal to confront his trauma, his inability to trust others, and his insistence on acting alone have led him to become a figure whose humanity has been slowly eroded by the very mission that gave him purpose. Throughout his journey, Batman has increasingly distanced himself from the world around him, choosing the path of vengeance over healing and emotional connection. His obsession with control and his failure to see the complexity of human nature, the gray areas of justice, have made him less of a man and more of an idea, a symbol that embodies both hope and fear. In his unyielding pursuit of justice, he has not only failed to heal Gotham, but has also become the very thing that perpetuates its suffering. Gotham's criminals evolve in response to his relentless war on crime, and the city remains locked in a cycle of chaos that Batman, in his isolation, cannot break. Batman's relationships with those closest to him, Alfred, Robin, Batgirl, and even the citizens of Gotham, have become strained or non-existent, as his emotional detachment and obsession with his mission drive him further into loneliness. He has pushed away those who might have helped him heal, choosing instead to remain in the shadows, fighting alone and sacrificing everything, including his own humanity, for an ideal that cannot be achieved through force alone. The paradox of Batman's existence is that he is both the solution and the problem. Gotham needs him, yet his presence ensures that the city will never fully heal. His moral absolutism, his refusal to bend or adapt, and his emotional isolation have created a dynamic where Batman's own struggles with justice and control mirror the city's own struggles with corruption and chaos. Gotham cannot move forward as long as Batman is trapped in his own psychological and emotional prison, unable to confront his past, to heal, or to trust others. In the end, Batman's greatest tragedy is not his inability to save Gotham, but his inability to save himself. His refusal to acknowledge that true heroism lies in empathy, collaboration, and understanding, rather than in fear and control, has made him a tragic figure, a symbol of what happens when a person becomes consumed by their mission to the point of losing themselves. Gotham will never find peace as long as Batman continues to define it by his own rigid standards, as long as he remains a figure driven by trauma rather than healing, by vengeance rather than justice. Batman's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession and the cost of living in isolation. In trying to save Gotham, Batman has lost himself, a man defined not by his humanity, but by the darkness that consumes him. Gotham may never heal, but perhaps, in time, Bruce Wayne will learn that healing begins not with vengeance, but with embracing one's humanity, with confronting pain, forging connections, and recognizing that true strength lies not in the solitary fight against darkness, but in the willingness to face it with others by your side.